Hey, everybody, this is Ben Bowman and Alex Titus. Welcome back to another episode of the Oregon Bridge.
There's lots of great races across Oregon that would really shift the balance of power pretty significantly. But I mean, it is a free for all. I don't think there's any nominee that thinks that they're the one that's supposed to win or that they were just supposed to be coronated. I think on the Republican side, we got a pretty hot ticket race, just like we have on the Democratic side. So it's interesting to see these races. I hadn't thought about it until we were talking and how much they mirror each other. This will be the most important election in everyone's lifetime, as it always is. And so supporting your party nominee will matter more than if that nominee is perfect.
Hey, everybody, we're excited to have you back for another episode. And today is a real special episode because today we have with us Reagan Knopp, who will be talking about all things. Well, actually, we'll get a little bit into the Dems too, but all things GOP primaries, amounts folks have raised, who's up, who's down. This will be a heavy politics episode. But first, Reagan, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Oh, it's good to be back. I'm coming to you not from Oregon, but from the state that liberals love and Republicans love to hate, California.
Reagan, is it true that you are having meetings with Governor Gavin Newsom to discuss progressive policy ideas while you're in California?
That's 100% false. Thank you for giving me the chance to clear the air on that.
I definitely thought, Ben, you were going to make a Bob Tiernan joke, meeting with him in California, but
we're trying to schedule an interview with Bob Tiernan, and we hope that works out. But let's talk primary politics. So Reagan, I think before we jump into congressional races and legislative races, obviously the race that I think the most people are paying attention to is the governor's race.
I thought you were going to say the U.S. Senate Republican primary against highly defeatable Ron Wyden.
I just saw the Oregonian did a compilation of all the amount raised by all the people running for Congress or Senate in Oregon, and they made it into like a bar graph so you can see how everyone stacks up. And Ron Wyden is at $11.7 million raised.
And he could probably win with like a quarter of that.
Yes, or less, because we'll get to the Senate. But before we get to the Senate, let's talk about the governor's race. Everybody's running for governor. Give us a rundown of how you see at least the top two. Who's the top tier of the GOP primary as we head into the final week of the election primary?
Yeah, it definitely feels like, and I'm looking for, I'm scrolling through, I should have had this open, Oregon Catalyst, which had covered first the poll that came from Nelson Research on Star Wars Day, May the 4th. And so that poll really shows.
And how would you rate the polling from them, Reagan, overall in terms of historical?
I haven't seen a ton of their polling that's probably been public historically. This is kind of one of the first big races where they've dropped polls so far. So I think this race will kind of really test them in terms of the publicly released polling that they're doing. And I give them a lot of credit because primary polling is a lot tougher than general election polling because you don't have those two polarized segments that are really easy to target. Primary polling and primaries in general are a lot more fluid. So that poll showed Drazen getting 19% of the vote, Bob Tiernan getting 14% of the vote. That includes people who said they're voting for those candidates or they're leaning towards voting for those candidates. Bud Pierce at 9.5%. And Stan Pulliam at 6.9%. And those are the top four in that poll. I think that there could be some late movement if there's some spending. Like Bridget Barton has a lot of cash on hand, and she just went up on TV, so I think that could move the numbers a little bit. And Pulliam, Pierce, Tiernan, and Drazen are all on TV. Drazen's actually the biggest spender on TV with over like 1.2 million spent.
I was going to say
about 800,000, probably more by now.
Reagan, you wrote a newsletter post that basically said you trust, not, I don't know, you didn't say you trust these numbers, but these numbers seem right to you. What was that based on?
Yeah, so that's based on there's been some data from a group called Echelon, I think it's pronounced Echelon Insights, Patrick Ruffini on Twitter. He's really great. He did a study of money and vote share and whether they correlate. And they said especially they do in open primaries. In challenger primaries, not as much. That's more about issues than money. But in open primaries, money correlates a ton with who gets the most votes. And so Drazen spent, when I wrote this, 1.1 million on TV. Tiernan was about 900,000. Bud Pierce is almost 400,000. And then Bridget had bought about 275,000, Pulliam 150,000. So the numbers are roughly correlating with the fundraising / TV spending. So the polling and those kind of things are matching up, especially in the top 4 or 5 candidates. So it definitely seems right. We'll have to obviously wait for election day to see how things go, because there are some candidates who have some very, very rabid online fan bases, and we'll see if that really translates into that those strong votes or get out the vote programs.
My
now,
last
Reagan, what is going on with? And I asked you this question over text, but I want this for the podcast too. What is going on with Bud? I guess those numbers were particularly shocking to me. One, because I mean, Bob has not even been an active candidate for what, like a month and a half, maybe 2 months.
Filing date, so March, he would have been 2 months now.
Yeah. So so when this podcast comes out, basically 2 months. I mean, obviously he has historical relevance in Oregon, but it was sort of shocking to me to see him come in second place relatively quickly. I know a lot of people too who wanted Drazen to run had been criticizing Drazen because they thought that she hadn't jumped in early enough. Now, maybe that won't matter because, of course, she's first in the polls right now. But what is going on from your perspective with Bud? I mean, top of the ticket before, spent a bunch of money in his race before, like he raised a respectable and spent a respectable amount. Like, why are we not seeing his numbers higher, especially since it seems, I guess I don't know exactly the numbers in terms of name ID for each of these candidates, but to me, Bud's just seem higher. Like, what do you think is going on with that?
So it's hard to say. He seems to, just kind of based on those most recent expenditure reports, been spending a lot of money on texting specifically, and so they've been sinking some money into what looks like peer-to-peer texting based on the on the expenditure filings that he has to do with the Secretary of State. But I haven't had a chance to talk with their campaign to kind of see if they're willing to divulge their strategy. But it looks to me like they felt good early about his numbers. Maybe they have internal numbers that are different that they're confident in, and that they're just trying to buy the cheapest possible primary win. And so they're spending the least amount that they think they need to still win the primary election. And so they have more resources for the general. That'd be my best guess at the potential strategy. But it is a little surprising to see Bud in third and Tiernan in second. And that's maybe just based on people responding to TV ads, and maybe that won't close their vote. But it was strange.
One interesting thing. So I don't know if you all watched the Willamette Week endorsement interview with the GOP, some of the GOP candidates. Bob Tiernan in that interview said very specifically, I think it was that interview, said very specifically that he intentionally jumped in late, like it was part of his strategy. And the premise was, one, you save a bunch of money. You're not spending money early. And so the alternative to that would be Stan Pulliam, who got in super early. And Reagan, how much money did he spend last year? Do you have any idea? I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars spent before the field was even set, whereas Tiernan didn't really waste any money before people were paying attention. And then the second was, he basically said it meant less. I think he used the term privacy, but another way of saying it would be scrutiny. No scrutiny from the press prior to jumping in. So it'll be interesting to compare people who were in super early and campaigned for over a year versus people who showed up at the end with a lot of money, how that shakes out.
Yeah. So I don't have a total on exactly what Bud spent before people were paying attention, but he did have more of a campaign. He was paying staff. He was being active. He was trying to get his campaign set up, and he'd been doing it for a while. Same with Pulliam. He'd been in the race for a while. And with Tiernan, I think my question has been, the last time this happened was 2016, where you had Bud Pierce, who did get in early and spent a lot of money early, and then Alan Alley, who jumped in. He was the same type of candidate as Tiernan. He was people knew him from before. He had raised and spent a lot of money, was up on TV, but he ended up coming just short. And I think that had he given himself more runway, he might have actually had a chance to overtake Bud in that campaign, or at least given himself the opportunity to do that. And you were talking about the limited scrutiny. In that same newsletter, I linked 5, maybe 6 stories about Tiernan related to unpaid property taxes, which he's since taken care of, and then stuff related to him testifying in court, maybe that he lived in California or was residing in California at that time. So he hasn't really avoided a lot of that scrutiny, maybe just shortened the amount of time voters get to hear about it. It seems like.
Exactly. So one final question on this, and then we'll pivot to the other races. When the primary is over and a GOP nominee is decided, is it possible that there will be a case to be made? I don't understand as well as you do the sort of lanes of this primary, like the MAGA lane or the Chamber of Commerce lane or whatever they might be. But is there a chance that there will be split votes among, say, Stan Pulliam and Bridget Barden and Kerry McQuiston and Mark Thielman, on one side versus, do you see a spoiler potential or people who will make that claim depending on how the votes shake out? Or do you think it's kind of just considered a free for all?
No, I think that it is a free for all. I don't think that there's any nominee that thinks that they're the one that's supposed to win or that they were just supposed to be coronated. I think every campaign has put up, the best operation that they possibly can under, whatever circumstances and resources and connections that they have available. So no, I don't think there will be a lot of that. I think I have discussed with people the possibility that in the general election, because the nominee didn't get a large or is unlikely to get a large share of the vote, an overwhelming share, that could hurt them in the general election. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't looked in to see if there's any data studies on that. But you could have a situation where only 30% of Republicans voted for the general election nominee. But I kind of tend to think most people will consolidate behind the Republican nominee, just because we'll be in kind of that era where it's like, okay, everyone will have forgot about the primary. It's red wave time. Let's just get the Republicans across the line. These are the ones we've got. And you'll have a little squabbling on the edges, but you always have that. So
interesting. Well, now, Reagan, let's pivot to a race that's a lot less competitive than the one for governor. So we do have a Republican that will have the pleasure of taking on Senator Ron Wyden coming this November. Give us the breakdown of that race. Who are the players? How much has been raised? And who do you think is going to pull out ahead?
And well, I think from the start, it is important to note that this is a bit of a suicide mission. Republicans have attempted to put up good candidates against Jeff Merkley because he's kind of viewed as the weaker of the two U.S. Senate candidates. And I say attempted because we haven't obviously done a great job of that. But Wyden is viewed, people talk about, is he really an Oregonian because he spends time in New York and his family, his wife's family has company in New York and all that. But he still is pretty popular in Oregon. Pretty popular overall, has a higher approval rating than Merkley did in the last morning consult poll. But so taking up this suicide mission, businessman from Lane County, Darren Harbick, and he's raised the most money, $202,000. And his consultant is actually former state senator Bruce Starr. And I think he's probably the likeliest guy to win this race, but I'll talk a little bit in a minute once I get to the rest of the candidates about another, maybe 10% scenario. Sam Palmer is a county commissioner, and I forgot to look up what county it was from. I think it's one of the smaller rural counties. I want to say Lake County, but that feels wrong. So I'll check on that real quick for you guys. But he's raised about $90,000. He came to the race a little bit later, and his consultant is Chuck Adams, New Media Northwest. Jason Beebe is the mayor of Prineville, raised about $14,000. His consultant is Brian Iverson. And then you have Joey Perkins, who was the nominee 2 years ago against Jeff Merkley. She's raised $21,000 and is a public QAnon conspiracy theorist, which created a lot of issues last cycle for her. A lot of pretty negative media coverage with that, and there was kind of a national trend that was being seen where you had these QAnon candidates pop up in these odd races, and so that created a lot of problems actually for Republican candidates down the ballot who were asked if they supported QAnon because she was at the top of the ballot because it was kind of coming up. So I think Harvick's most likely to win. He's been most active, spent the most money, but there is kind of a scenario where maybe Darren Harbick, Sam Palmer, Jason Beebe all kind of split the rational Republican vote, and Joey Perkins kind of sneaks through with those people who remember maybe voted for her before, maybe didn't see the QAnon stuff, or maybe they love it and they're voting for her because of that.
So I guess, Reagan, my question is there. I mean, 200K doesn't really seem like that much money. How does Jo Wright Perkins not just win? I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, she has either run for 5 or 6 cycles straight with her name appearing on the ballot somewhere. I feel like name ID has to play in pretty big there to some extent when, the other candidates have a couple $100,000 at most.
Yeah, I know Harbeck has sent some mailers to high turnout Republicans. He's run some ads on Fox News. So I think he's hoping that can help bring his name ID up a little bit. But you're right. I think Perkins' high name ID could give her a little bit of an advantage. But I tend to think that for the people who did see those negative stories, most Republicans aren't QAnon conspiracy theorists, don't think it's awesome. I think a lot of those voters are just going to pivot to somebody else. And Harbeck is the person who they're most likely to have seen in the campaign trail in some form, whether it was, paid media or at a Republican meeting or whatever.
Gotcha. Yeah, and Ben's always sending me this QAnon stuff, and I have to tell him to tone it down a little bit. So he's one of the Q Dems, growing population.
Is that a thing? Is that Q Dems?
Q Dems. Okay. So the next I want to transition to CD6 primary.
Yes.
Ben, why don't you kick us off with that?
So on the Democratic side, we've talked to a few of the candidates on this podcast. What the latest polling is showing, there's a poll from Public Policy Polling, which is a left-wing, not super left, but like left of center polling outfit. I think it has an A- rating from like 538. And it shows, I believe Salinas, I should have this in front of me, but I believe Salinas at 19% or 18%. I think 18%, and then Carrick Flynn at 14%. So this is notable for a few reasons. One, this is the first time Salinas has been in the lead head-to-head with Carrick Flynn since the millions and millions of dollars have been spent by Flynn. And because it's probably the last poll we'll see before the election, although who knows, anything's possible. So I think the way that I am looking at that race is it's basically a 2-person race, I would say. Cody Reynolds has raised a ton of money. Like I was looking at the Oregonians list. In fact, I'll walk.
Excuse me. He's loaned himself a ton of money.
Yeah, that is a much better way to describe it. So
yeah,
according to this list, so we mentioned Ron Wyden's fundraising, 11.7 million. Cody Reynolds is second in Oregon at 2.7 million. Did he loan himself all of that?
Like 2 million of it, I think.
Okay.
He's raised about 700K if I remember right.
So then other CD6 candidates, Matt West at 1 million, and he loaned himself a lot of money. Carrick Flynn at 910,000. So obviously this does not count independent expenditures. And then you go down to Andrea Salinas at 637,000, Kathleen Harder at 460,000, and Loretta Smith at 309,000. And I think that just about does it for the people who are actually raising. Representative Teresa Alonso Leon has raised 84,000. So this is an interesting race because it kind of is the exact opposite of what Reagan was talking about expenditures lining up with a predictable percentage in a poll. Like the amount of money spent to support a candidate has almost no correlation in this primary with what the polling says the voters are at. So I think it's probably a 2-person race, although I don't think the winner is going to get more than 40% probably. I don't know, Reagan, Alex, what do you think?
Real quick, I do want a real-time update. Sam Palmer is a Grant County commissioner, so apologies for getting that wrong.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think for Dems, you kind of have this dueling polling. Matt West dropped a poll a couple of weeks ago to Willamette Week that was multiple months old, actually, the time that he released it, and it had Flynn up significantly on Salinas, and now kind of looks like she's closed that gap. And you're right, PPP is a pretty reputable pollster. I did note from the Oregonian article, there was a comment that said the Salinas campaign did not immediately release full poll results, despite a request from the Oregonian. Based on limited information the campaign provided, it's possible another candidate or candidates reached a statistical tie with Carrick Flynn at 14%. So it's possible this is actually a 3-horse race, and Salinas is trying to hide that by not giving the full polling information over to the Oregonian and other journalists.
With the third horse being Matt West, you would presume?
I don't know. It could be Cody Reynolds. I mean, they've both been kind of spending a lot of money, or at least raising a lot of money. I actually haven't looked at the spending reports, so I would guess it's West, but I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I've seen actually more stuff from Reynolds, but I'm not in the 6th congressional district.
So the other reason why I see, and this will be in the liftoff, the other reason why I see Salinas is surging is because she just secured the endorsement of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. This is the caucus. Blumenauer's a member, DeFazio's a member, Bonamici's a member, Bernie Sanders is a member. Those folks on the left. That's a powerful group that probably could provide some resources in the closing months. She's already been endorsed by Bold PAC, which is the Latino Caucus's super PAC. And then I believe there's another super PAC, I'll have to think of it, that committed to spending for her in the final months. So money obviously will not be the predictor in this race. But the other thing that Salinas has going for her, this is like, I've been talking to some people who think the voters pamphlet was like a more powerful thing 5, 10, 15 years ago, which is, I don't know anything about that. But if you just based off voters pamphlets, Salinas's endorsements are like, there is no second place. She's got Planned Parenthood, the League of Conservation Voters, SEIU, Bonamici, Governor Brown, Attorney General Rosenblum, Governor Roberts, all the labor organizations essentially. I didn't even know this. She's got Our Revolution, which is Bernie's PAC. She's got Stand for Children. Yeah.
Our Revolution, though, if you look, I don't know if they've scrubbed them yet, but they have endorsements from all their previous cycles. They have a horrible record in Oregon. They do not win very many races. They lose a ton of races, primaries and generals.
My point being there, and there's like literally there's dozens more individual. And I mean, she's got the Oregonian, Willamette Week, Yam Hill News Register. So to the extent that endorsements matter, she will have a significant edge over her opponents. Carrick Flynn has like the mayor of Tualatin, the mayor of Tigard is endorsing Matt West. So other candidates have. Kathleen Harder's got some really good Salem area endorsements, actually.
Carrick Flynn is going to win because he has Andrew C. Weber, who's President Obama's Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense as his number one endorsement. That's going to win him the race.
So anyway,
I'm being a little sarcastic there.
We like snarks occasionally on the podcast. But anyway, that's a sense on the Democratic primary side. This is one of those races where I think if it's not Salinas or Flynn, I think people will be surprised, but I think people are expecting this to be close and to have, some sort of unpredictable numbers because of the ridiculously large amount of money spent. But the interesting thing, Reagan, is on the Republican side in CD6, which is theoretically a relatively competitive race. Some much smaller numbers. Can you talk about the Republican primary?
Smaller number, but very similar kind of situation in terms of the candidates and what's happening. So you have probably the most well-known candidate is State Representative Ron Noble McMinnville. And his fundraising has been okay, hasn't been out of the park, but he has a lot more name ID, a lot more of the endorsements from a lot of the, Republican politicians, groups that you would know. And so I'm trying to pull up his fundraising numbers because I forgot to put them in my note here. But
I was going to say,
so he's one of the candidates and probably the most well-known one. The next one, Amy Ryan Corser, who ran C5 last time, got about 45% of the vote against Kurt Schrader not spending very much money. But the candidate who kind of came out of nowhere was businessman Mike Erickson. And he's actually got the fundraising advantage. He's loaned himself, I think, over $150,000 now, and has raised close to $300,000. So Ron Noble's at $140,000 raised at this point. So Erickson is really kind of running a surprise campaign. Kind of came out of nowhere. He has kind of there's this situation that kind of tanked his previous congressional runs. Where there was an allegation that he had paid for his girlfriend's, not wife's, abortion and dropped her off at a clinic, which I believe he kind of refutes that telling of the events. But in any event, that caused him a lot of trouble before, and as a result, I don't believe he's endorsed by Oregon Right to Life. So that could be obviously a factor in this race. Ron Noble is supported by Oregon Right to Life. So we'll see. And it's kind of a name ID versus money again, and that kind of the party deciding, or the kind of figure that the party likes. With you have Salinas, who's kind of coalescing a lot of that support. Noble's kind of that same candidate on the CD6 side. Erickson's kind of the outside guy with more money, and so it'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out, and if it plays out the same for Republicans and Democrats, or if it plays out differently. I think that'll be really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, what has been so I've got the Oregonians list here, and they have Mike Erickson at 722,000 raised.
Oh,
and
wow.
And they've got Ron Noble at 141,000, which is about where you had him. So yeah. five times more money for Mike Erickson than Ron Noble is
that's shocking. That's a big advantage. Yeah. And it is a big surprise. Yes, I must have missed his most recent FEC report as I've been on vacation here. Those were due kind of this Friday, so we were traveling. So thanks for updating that number. But yeah, so it'll be fascinating. You have again this kind of the most well-known figure versus the figure with the most money, or the most money spent on their behalf in Flynn's case.
So should we go to CD4 next? So
yeah, go for it.
CD4 on the R side, I believe, is just Alex Skarlatos, correct? And he's raised 1.9 million, but one of I think we were texting about this, he's spending his money really quickly, right?
Yeah, he has a pretty high burn rate, and so I haven't been able to get in to see exactly what that is, if he's spending it on fundraising or on voter contact or media. But yeah, he's the only candidate in the voters pamphlet, so he's the only candidate out there. He'll be the nominee in CD4, and all the Democrats already are doing their fundraising, their emails off of Alex Skarlatos and Kevin McCarthy being their kind of opponents in the race. So yeah, we'll be looking at Alex Skarlatos on the Republican side of the fourth. The Democratic side, which you can cover, Ben, is a little bit more interesting. Not that much more interesting, though.
It's a little bit more interesting. So Labor Commissioner Val Hoyle has raised 782,000. I think. Yeah, so she's outside of CD6, she's the highest. So CD6 has the top 3 fundraisers on the Democratic side, and then Val, and then she's got 3 opponents who are all kind of in the same ballpark of funds raised. Andrew Kallick has raised 275,000. Doyle Canning has raised 232,000. And then John Selker has raised 185,000. So anyway, on the Democratic side, you basically got Val, who's raised, a couple times more than her next closest opponents. For everyone's reference, Andrew, I listened to the OPB sort of debate. It's a very short debate. Val is similarly situated to Andrea in her race, with sort of like establishment support, organizational support, institutional support. She's got Merkley, Wyden, etc. Kallick is running sort of as like a new voice campaign. His take is like, voters don't want incumbents right now. We need new voice, new leadership. And then Doyle Canning is running the sort of, I would describe it as a Bernie Sanders kind of campaign, like far left. She's running on Medicare for all and environmental policies. And then John Selker, I think he's a professor at Oregon State University. He did not participate in the OPB debate. So I think most people think Val is going to win. That's what I think is going to happen. I did endorse Val, as I've endorsed Andrea Salinas. So there's my bias. But unless either of you want to push back on that prediction, then we can head to what's next. CD5.
Val will win.
Okay, CD5. Reagan, what is going on the Republican side?
Well, on the Republican side, we got a pretty hot ticket race, just like we have on the Democratic side. So it's interesting to see these races. I hadn't thought about it until we were talking, and how much they mirror each other. So you've got former CD2 candidate, businessman Jimmy Crumpacker. He's running in the 5th Congressional District from his residence in Tumalo, which he claimed in the previous race. And he's running as outsider businessman. And the conservative candidate in the race, because he's running against Lori Chavez Dreamer's former mayor of Happy Valley. She was a 2-time candidate for state representative against Janelle Bynum. She lost a very close race the first time. I think that was 2012, and then 2014 in a rematch. Didn't do quite as well that time. So you kind of have, again, more of a conservative establishment face-off, although it's not quite as clean. So Chavez Dreamer, she's got support from Elise Stefanik and a PAC that Stefanik has set up called, I believe it's called EPAC, which is to support women Republican candidates. And that's a big push at the federal level, is to get from Republicans in DC and across the country to get more women into these races, because I think really not only does it help the diversity argument, but I think also they've just shown that women perform better, like 3 to 5 points better than men do in a lot of these competitive races. And so they're trying to get more Republican women into the group. But one of the issues is that Lori, and one of the openings, basically, I mean, I would have told you that Lori had this race locked up, except for she has not had support from Oregon Right to Life. Never got it in her 2 state rep races that I'm aware of. Doesn't have it this time. Jimmy Crumpacker has that support. Also got the endorsement of the Oregonian. And so they're both kind of running a pretty competitive race. And actually, can you reference that chart from the Oregonian, which I'm not a subscriber, so I may not be able to see it, to see where they're at on fundraising wise, because they just filed new reports. And I think Lori might have just took the lead again on fundraising, but it's been a pretty close race. And they're kind of in the $500,000 range, it seems like, last time I checked.
Yeah, Lori surged in fundraising. She is up to 669,000 raised, and Jimmy is at 541,000 raised. So very competitive on the fundraising.
Yeah. So they've kind of been trading back and forth every fundraising quarter. Lori was ahead, and then Jimmy was ahead, and now Lori's ahead again. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But I think that'll be a really tight one. I don't have a good sense of who's going to win that one, honestly. So I think that's a toss up right there, and a true toss up.
Do you remember? So Jimmy ran in CD2. What place did he come in?
I think he came in fourth. I want to say it was.
I think it was.
Fourth. It was Benz first. It was I think Bueller second, Atkinson third, and Crumpacker like right after Atkinson.
And so he was probably.
I'll look up those results.
So the reason I asked that is because some of his CD2 district is in this new district.
Yes. So mostly just Central Oregon, or the Deschutes County section of the district is the same. Because I believe this new CD5 kind of goes from Salem, kind of comes down the San Am Canyon, and then takes in kind of Highway 22 as you go into Bend, which I drove a ton. You go from Bend to Salem a lot when your dad's the state senator from Bend serving in Salem. So you basically drove this new district now a ton. And then so it has Deschutes County in it, and then goes all the way up and takes in Salem, and then Clackamas County, where here's your segue, Ben, Kurt Schrader lives.
And that brings us to the Democratic side. This is another very interesting primary for totally different reasons. So Schrader is a monster fundraiser. He, according to the Oregonian, between January 1st, 21 and April 27th, 2022, Kurt Schrader's raised $2.2 million, which is a lot of money. Jamie McLeod Skinner, his challenger, has raised a ton of money too, but she's at 692,000. So like in any other race, she would be incredibly competitive, but because she's running against essentially an incumbent, although it is a different district, she's being way outraised and outspent. She certainly has the grassroots support, right? Like I think the way that the media has framed this, and I think this is true, I haven't fact checked it, is like unprecedented county party support. So the Deschutes County Democrats, Clackamas County Democrats, and I think one other county Democrat.
Marion and Lynn County Democrats have all done resolutions. You're going to talk about resolutions in support of Jamie McLeod Skinner over Kurt Schrader.
And the reason I believe, or at least this is the way it's being framed, is the reason why the county parties took the sort of the unprecedented part is endorsing in a competitive D-on-D primary. But the reason why they cite is because Kurt Schrader has the support of the DTRIP, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which supports Democratic incumbents and candidates across the country. So Reagan, what do you make of this race? You're a Central Oregon guy.
Yeah. I would say that McLeod Skinner really touts, and this is where I think that she gets something wrong, is she really touts how well she did against Greg Walden in the 2018 race that she ran against him, because she ran for Secretary of State in the primary in 2020. So in 2018, she ran for CD2 against Walden. She was kind of the Dem sacrificial lamb, and she did, quote unquote, better than any Democrat has ever done. number one against Greg Walden in like a decade, and number two in Deschutes County. She won Deschutes County. She's the first Democrat to do that against Walden. Here's the thing. Any Democrat running against Greg Walden would have won Deschutes County, because Deschutes County has had a massive demographics change and has turned, for the first time in 2020 or maybe 2018, became a Dem majority register. Like Dems overtook Republicans in Deschutes County, been a Republican stronghold forever. Massive population growth in Bend, and an influx of, and people changing their voter registration and all that has changed the demographics of the counties. The average Democrat probably would have beat Greg Walden in Deschutes County no matter what. He kind of pivoted to, Walden had, from being like a true moderate Republican to really embracing and becoming pretty powerful during the Trump administration. And so he kind of embraced more of his conservative side once again, later in his terms, especially starting in 2016 and in 2018. So he had become a much more conservative, more polarizing figure, not as much as the moderate Republican that he'd been portrayed as for so long. So I think most Democrats would have done that. So McLeod-Skidder touts that. I don't really buy that. I think most Democrats think that Schrader is the best bet because he survived a GOP wave before in 2010 against Scott Brune, where the NRCC came in, and this is the last time he was really challenged strongly and spent a ton of money. Brune raised a ton of money, but Schrader actually did pretty well in that election. And he fended off that tough challenge. And so I think most Dem insiders would tell you privately, but not publicly, that they think that Schrader's still the best bet. Did make a couple of mistakes, though. He didn't vote for the $2,000 stimulus checks. He talked about the second impeachment of Trump being like a lynching, and which he later had to apologize for. And so I think that if there's something that does him in, it's those two things. But for the most part, I think Schrader's got the institutional support, although all of the groups that are supporting him, a lot more moderate, as you talked about, but they're running ads touting him as a progressive. Planned Parenthood is stuck with him, and a couple of the other major groups. And so that could be the reason that Jamie doesn't pull it off.
I think we're forgetting the biggest one too, honestly, which is that he won the coveted endorsement of President Biden. I was pretty shocked to see that, in terms of that obviously there's a shrinking number of people like Kurt Schrader on the Democratic side who are still in Congress, and Dems are likely to potentially knock off another one this upcoming primary with Henry Salazar, I think his name is. He's a pretty conservative Democrat from Texas. Quellar. Yeah, he's pro-life. Believe he's a little bit more conservative on LGBT issues also. But he almost went down last cycle, and it's looking like he may go down this cycle as well. But I was pretty shocked to see the endorsement of Schrader by Biden, because I thought that may buy him a little bit of backlash. But I mean, we've talked about this before and also written about it in terms of that, the right wants to take out Schrader, the left wants to take out Schrader, and he just basically keeps on chugging, as he has been now for well over a decade. So,
well, and the way the story goes is interesting too, because I believe Schrader secured the Biden endorsement like the day of or the day after Biden visited Portland. So you can just imagine him pulling him aside on the tarmac and being like, listen, I'm sure he framed it it sounded like, based on the president's statement, it sounded like they have some sort of relationship. I wouldn't be surprised if Schrader is one of the people that Biden actually called to whip votes, because most of the votes in the House Democratic caucus were definitely going to vote for Biden's priorities. Schrader is someone who he probably wasn't sure on some things. So I think that was a personal ask by Schrader that was responded to by the president.
Yeah, and I mean, also Schrader was one of the people potentially holding up the Build Back Better. So I imagine they probably had many conversations about that from a policy perspective. So I was pretty surprised by that. I thought that may make some people upset at Biden, but I haven't really seen any sort of that backlash from, I mean, you would know better than me, Ben, but from progressives or folks on Twitter or anything like that. But I thought that was a pretty darn big endorsement. One, just to have that kind of on the slot, but then two, I mean, there was tons of earned media around that also. I mean, that was like, that news story was literally everywhere. So
yeah, well, I haven't seen backlash. I don't think a ton of people are surprised. I think Jamie put out a statement where she basically said, I disagree with the president and here's why. There's a couple ways that you could interpret the Biden endorsement. One is you could interpret this as him saying, I think Schrader has the best chance of winning the general election, to Reagan's point earlier, and he really doesn't want to lose the House. Or you could interpret it as a classic Biden move. He's a relationships guy. He's an establishment guy. He comes from the party. So supporting an incumbent would not be a surprise on that front. So
the other thing I find interesting about that is that just that Schrader is widely being viewed as, and he doesn't take as much of the heat. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema have taken all the heat, but Schrader has been a big impediment on the Build Back Better, and it took forever to get that thing through the House, and Schrader was one of the reasons why. And so I think it was kind of the progressives don't quite understand the relationships piece, maybe, at least some of the ones on Twitter that I saw a few tweets about it, but not very many. And they were basically like, why would Biden endorse the guy who's tanking his agenda? Well, it's like, it's not tanking his agenda. He's endorsing a guy that can help him hold the House just in case things swing back the Democrats' favor, right? And so I think that's what it's about. It's like, doesn't matter if he's voted against his agenda, 75, 100%. At this point, they need Dems to hold the House, and he's one of the seats that needs to stay. And the Congressional Leadership Fund, which is a Republican House affiliated super PAC or targets House seats, has booked a couple million in TV ads to take out Schrader in the fall, right? And so he's already a target. And so they know that they really need to circle the wagons. And it seems like DC is circling the wagons, Oregon doing a little less circling of the wagons for Schrader.
So here my last comment on congressional races, and then we can move to legislative primaries. My theory, and I could be proven wrong on this, but regardless of who the candidate is in CD6 on the Democratic side, regardless of who the candidate is in CD5 and CD4, I think Democrats in Oregon and nationally will circle the wagons around the nominee, and they'll spend a bunch of money and they'll knock on all the doors. I've seen some talk of like people who say they'd be very upset if Carrick Flynn wins. I don't think that will stick, to be honest with you. I really don't. I've heard some, I'm sure there will be some in CD5 who are not enthusiastic about Congressman Schrader if he's the nominee, but I don't think that will be representative of the most resources and grassroots support, including the county parties who endorsed his opponent. That's my assumption. And in CD4, it's not, I don't think this is as much of a consideration, but that's my prediction is like, we're all going to, Democrats are going to vote how they're going to vote, but I think the money, resources, and manpower will be there to support the nominees, and probably true on the right, I'm guessing, Reagan.
I totally agree with that. I think everyone circles the wagons for their nominees because this will be the most important election in everyone's lifetime, as it always is. And so supporting your party nominee will matter more than if that nominee is perfect.
All right. So for the last section here, let's shift to the Republican primaries for the state legislature. Reagan, where do you want to start?
So I think we'll start in Senate District 26, which is kind of that north section. And I should have pulled up my legislative map, but again, my vacation prep skills are very bad. So Senate District 26 is essentially an open Senate seat that was created. It was kind of the redistricting kind of moved around what had been Alan Olson and Bill Kennemer's seats, and so they've been shifted. And so 26 is an open seat that has the opportunity for Republican pickup. I believe that this is a Republican reg advantage state Senate seat, or very close to it. And so you have running former state representative Daniel Bonham, who was redistricted out of his House district. He was actually merged into Vicky Breeze Iverson, state rep Vicky Breeze Iverson's district, now House Republican leader Vicky Breeze Iverson. And so he opted to jump to the Senate. And I think it's great because I know him really well. He's a really good guy, raised in a ton of money. I think I saw him over 100,000 maybe already. And he has an opponent named Steve Bates. He's a veterans advocate who was considered as an appointment and made the finalist list for Alan Olson's seat, but he was beaten in the county commission voting, as everyone was, handily by Bill Kennemer, who's now a state senator. And Kennemer doesn't have a primary. He's a very competitive general election race, and hopefully we can have a chance to do a general election breakdown, because there's lots of great races across Oregon that would really shift the balance of power pretty significantly. But Senate District 26 Republican primary, Bonham has a lot of relationships. He's got name ID. He was really good state representative. And so I think of the voters that know him from his old district will vote for him again, and he'll clean up there. Jamie Kate filed on filing day, which means she attracted some Republicans who maybe thought that she wasn't going to run again. She's got like 4 or 5 opponents. Only one of them made the voters pamphlet, but it doesn't matter. I've already gotten 2 mailers from her, nothing, because I live in her district now, even though I'm down the street from Shelley Bossart Davis's house, which tells you everything you need to know about Democrats' redistricting map. And
in the Portland metro area, we all live very close to each other, Reagan. So I'm just going to put that out there.
Yes, that's because you guys are not doing a very good job of drawing your seats. I can help you with that though next time if you want.
I'm sure we'll give you a call and ask for your help.
Absolutely. I expect to be included in those conversations. And so Jamie will definitely win. So the big seats, I think there's, I would say, 2 big Republican primaries that we really, could change the way things are going to go. There's a couple of open seats. There's a new open seat in Klamath Falls, the other half of a district. So you've got Warner Reschke, who's in a district, and they kind of created a new open district in Klamath Falls. I believe that's Emily McIntyre, who's in a local school board member there. I worked with her when I lived in Southern Oregon. She'll be great. She doesn't have a primary. So the 2 big primaries on the Republican side of the House, 3 actually. House District 12, which is like a Eugene area primary. It's a Republican leaning seat. So when Dems redid the map, they created a new Republican leaning Senate district because they had a population, even with population changes, they had gerrymandered Lane County so bad that they couldn't get all the safe seats they needed out of there. So they gave Republicans a seat that was more advantageous to us. So in the state Senate, Cedric Hayden, but it created a new House District 12. And there's 4 Republicans, and they've raised a grand total of Bill Ledford, and I don't have his bio here in front of me. But one of the candidates, Bill Ledford, has raised $0. Charlie Conrad has raised $12,500, so $12,500. Jeff Gowing, who's the mayor of Cottage Grove, has raised $1,800. Nicole DeGraff, who is a mom, she's been an outspoken advocate for bodily rights or health care, vaccine freedom. Nicole DeGraff, who ran before in a heavily Dem seat, has raised $5,000. So total fundraising there is like under $20,000 in a seat Republicans are almost guaranteed to win. We have no idea who's going to win. Nicole is the only candidate who got the endorsement from Oregon Right to Life. Jeff Gowing, mayor of Cottage Grove.
I was going to say, is there any other key endorsements besides Right to Life that may swing that, or does that endorsement basically just wrap it up considering the amount raised?
I don't think it does, because I think that in order for that endorsement to matter in races, it has to be publicized. Oregon Right to Life sends it out of their voter guide, but they don't spend money in these competitive primaries unless they have to. And I haven't noticed any spending from Oregon Right to Life. So there still is an opportunity potentially for another candidate, and depending on how well Nicole does. And so I think, the mayor, Charlie Conrad has spent the most money, but it's only $12,000. Jeff Gowing's the local mayor. You could see some pretty big vote splitting there. So I really couldn't tell you who would win. If I had to pick now, I'd go with Nicole because she's run before in the area and has the Oregon Right to Life endorsement, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just looked at the websites for Charlie Conrad and for Jeff Gowing, and neither one list any endorsements at all.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's other Lane County area endorsements that I don't know about that might matter. And so I'll text some local friends and find out. But so that one, the one race I do have a good prediction for you. So another seat that was created in redistricting was a Sandy.
This is the only good prediction of the podcast, Reagan.
I hope you stuck with us, listeners, because it's coming right now.
That's right. This is the number 1 primary that you need to know about. So it's Sandy M. Canyon. It's this area, it's Mill City, this state. And again, it's actually Trader's 5th congressional district. I drive through it all the time when I was going from Bend to Salem. And so you got 2 candidates. You've got Beth Jones, who's a local lawyer. She's raised about $25,000. She has endorsements from Kevin Mannix, Timber Unity, and Parents' Rights and Education, medical freedom groups. And so that's one camp. And then Ed Deal, he's a local businessman. He has the endorsements of Oregon Right to Life. So I think Ed Deal will win. So he's running both as the establishment candidate in the sense that he has the most money raised, and he has the backing of local politicians, Republican commissioners in Marion and Lynn County. But he's also running as the conservative candidate because he has the backing of Oregon Right to Life and is running as the only pro-life candidate endorsed by them in that race. But Beth Jones has also got maybe some of that grassroots support. But I really think that Ed Deal is probably going to run away with that one. Just based on what I know, the prior to the race, the people I've talked to involved in that, they really think that Ed's going to win that one. So, and that's a new open seat.
I was going to say lawn signs don't vote, but I just drove to Central Oregon last weekend, and there was a ton of Ed Deal signs along the highway.
That's true. That is facts. And then the last
there was a lot of
race,
Trump signs in that area in Oregon too, Ben.
He probably won that. He probably won that House district, Alex.
That is fair. That is fair.
You've got two races in the north. In House District 31, Brad Witt is the Democrat that currently represents that seat. That seat got redder in redistricting. I don't know that it'll be as competitive. Dems may try to put up a strong candidate, but it's getting rural, and it's like the whole coast is getting more conservative, even though the registrations haven't caught up to that yet. So Brad Witt's not running. He's actually running in an interesting Democratic primary in Salem, where he has another house. So it's an open seat, and Republicans are running Brian Stout, who ran last time, has raised about $70,000. His opponent is Drew Leda, who's only raised about $13,000. So I think Stout probably wins that election. And then Cyrus Javadi and Glenn Gaither. Javadi has outraised pretty significantly in House District 32, which is the next one down. That seat is open because Suzanne Weber is running for state Senate in Betsy Johnson's seat. And that's a very competitive, pretty important Senate race. And so her House seat is open. So I think Cyrus Javadi, apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. He's a local dentist. I think he's going to win that. I know his consultants. And so I think he'll do well. But one of the more interesting races, kind of a sleeper race, yes. House District 51. So this is actually the old House District 39, which is Christine Drazen's seat. So she left to run for governor. And so they had to fill her 39 seat. And in a pretty low attended PCP meeting that didn't really have a lot of runway because they were running right up on session. They were a couple days into session. They didn't have anyone. So they moved up the meeting time for that. So there wasn't a lot of notice. James Hebe, who's a part of the Young Republicans of Oregon, has some military background. He ended up winning that appointment process. And then one of the opponents that he had in that race, Elisa Davidson, is running against him. And that's kind of a hot race. You kind of have an establishment actually and lobby support in Salem, really actually backing Lisa Davidson. And James Hebe is a very kind of grassroots local PCP Republican type of a candidate. And he's trying to hang on to, his quasi incumbency there. Obviously, he hasn't been there very long, hasn't won an election there before. And redistricting has moved around that district. So I actually don't know who will win that one. Again, it's one of the situations people in the area have told me if lawn signs could vote, he would win, but they don't. So we don't know that for sure. So it'll be really interesting to watch that. So I'll be watching on election night, I'll be watching House District 51, House District 17, and State Senate District 26. Again, though, I'm pretty sure Daniel Bonham's gonna pull that one off. And then CD6 and CD5, and of course the GOP governor Republican primary. And then I'll be checking out Democrats.
Yeah, so Reagan, I want to queue up one last broad question for you, and then I'll go ahead and close this.
Sure.
But a lot of people, I would say probably 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, they were really excited in general, on the GOP side at least, with the quality and the level of candidates that the GOP has been able to recruit across the board this cycle. Obviously that, number of candidates, candidate strength, that obviously has evolved and changed over the past 6 months or so. Take a broad stroke here. Where, are you happy with, kind of from top to bottom, right? From governor to local office, from your perspective, how is the GOP looking from a candidate strength perspective coming into 2022? And obviously the primaries are still to happen, but as you said, some of these are competitive, but many of them will be locked in place. There's a lot of good candidates at the top, at least from my perspective. What's kind of your broad thought on that?
I would say looking at, and there's a bunch of races we didn't even cover that are just locked in races, no primary on either side. Everyone's gearing up for the general election, right? I think I'm pretty happy with Republican recruiting, especially in the legislature. The House and Senate Republicans, I think, did a great job. in their recruiting. They've got a lot of rock star candidates in places where they've got to have those rock star candidates in order to overcome, the disadvantages that they need to. Because in order for Republicans to, we don't have to win a ton of seats, one in the Senate, one in the House, I think, to break the super majorities. But if we want to be competitive or even come close to winning control of the legislature, we have to win a Democratic territory. And I think that there is a lot of energy and a lot of work that went into that recruiting, because this is the year that feels like the last time that we got close, which is we were, 450 votes in Southern Oregon away from tying both the House and the Senate in 2010, and a couple tens of thousand votes from having a Republican governor. And it's still to come. There's a lot of coordination and working together and just like magic that happened in that 2010 year that we've never been able to replicate. And so over the summer, I'll be watching to see, is that coordination happening? Are people coming together? Are you seeing the marshaling of the resources happening on the Republican side? There's a super PAC that was formed, or not a super PAC, because Oregon campaign finance doesn't have super PAC, but an outside group that has been formed that has Greg Walden doing fundraising for Republicans. That is a huge sign to me that Republicans are serious about taking back seats in the legislature and are serious about chipping away at Dem control, right? And so if we see that stuff continue to happen, the fundraising continue to happen, the candidates continue to do well and not make big mistakes. And we should talk about real quick one of those potential big mistakes being how Roe v. Wade gets handled in campaigns, right? Maybe we can just touch on that, and I'm happy to provide a Republican perspective on that if we have time. But let's not making mistakes is going to be important for Republicans.
Let's do that really quick and then close out. So Reagan, what is your brief overview of the implications of Roe v. Wade for Republicans?
All right, so I will. So politically, I think a couple of things. I think, and I could not find it for the life of me, but I went and I saw a tweet that showed some polling from CNN, and CNN had a poll, obviously very early, that showed that Democrat enthusiasm went up 7 points and Republican enthusiasm went up 9 points after the Roe v. Wade decision, right? So I think that there's a lot of people at the federal level and even in Oregon who think that abortion is a losing issue for Republicans. And if you handle it wrong, it is a losing issue. And we've had a lot of situations where Republicans in states have talked about legitimate rape and things that are just that is handling that issue wrong on the Republican side. I think if Republicans handle it right, and what I've coached a lot of candidates to do is focus on where the majority of voters are. And in Oregon, a majority of voters in poll after poll and nationally, you can show that they oppose abortion in those late trimesters. Now, Democrats will come back, like Ben will say, that very few number of abortions take place, but we still don't have any limits in Oregon. Oregon has no limits, 0 limits in place on abortion. And so I think that for Republicans, it's important for them to focus on where there's broad consensus, and that is that kind of that late term abortion, limits on late term abortion, and not allowing babies who survive an abortion is a big Republican talking point and legislation they pushed in the legislature and got Democrats on the record on via bill poll maneuver in the last legislative session that said that if a baby survives an abortion, that they have to be given certain medical care. And so those talking points are the ones that Republicans have to focus on, and they win those in polling. So if they do that, they can not only survive the potential overturning or limiting of Roe versus Wade, they actually do pretty well with it and actually hurt Democrats, because that polling goes really well for Republicans. Ben can talk about the Democratic side, which I think is pretty interesting too. But the last point I would say is because I also think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, if it happens, may not have as big an impact in Oregon, because we've had such broad abortion law for so long in Oregon, where we've not had any of these limits. We legalized and made abortion available even before Roe versus Wade. And not everybody may know that. A couple of years before Roe versus Wade, abortion became completely legal in Oregon, again with very few or no limits. And so that and at the ballot box, every time there's been a initiative on abortion, on limiting taxpayer funded abortion, it's been defeated, right? And so you have this situation where, because abortion is actually protecting Oregon, there may not be a motivating factor for voters in Oregon, and I think it could actually affect red states more significantly. There could be more battles over it there.
You will be unsurprised to hear that I disagree. So I think this will, frankly, I think this was going to be a really hard year for Democrats, and I think, and I'm obviously incredibly opposed to the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, along with 60 to 70% of Americans. But if they do, I think it will be an injection of energy into the Democratic electorate and also Democratic volunteers who will be turning out the vote. The way that I'm thinking about it, and Reagan, to your point about Oregon, I've been thinking about this, like, because you're correct, Oregon has 0 restrictions on abortions. I think we're the only or one of 2 states in the country where that is true.
So over the last 2 years, because of the concern of overturning Roe v. Wade, there's like a handful of states that have joined Oregon, like Maryland, Illinois, New York. They're all stripping. They're not all at 0 restrictions, but they've stripped away a ton, and they're all getting either to 0 or are close to getting to 0 restrictions on abortion.
So the reason why I think that matters is I was watching the debate between, it was the coin debate where Tobias Reed, Tina Kotek, and also George Carrillo and Patrick Starnes were there. And there was a question on Roe v. Wade, obviously. And what Tobias said, I think, is the framing that is going to matter, which is Roe v. Wade was always the backstop for people who believed in protecting access to abortion. Now there's no backstop. So what Tobias said is we're just one election cycle away from those rights being eroded, taken away, changed in some way. And for, a generation or multiple generations of Oregonians who are accustomed to and believe that right is fundamental and constitutional, and it's going to make abortion, like historically a Planned Parenthood or a pro-choice Oregon endorsement sort of was more signaling power, I think, about like what kind of a candidate you were, because I don't think there was a legitimate fear that at least in Oregon that could be taken away. But I do feel like it is a different feeling on the left after that leak from the Supreme Court of, I think, genuine fear and like genuine anger and anxiety that I think will be a huge motivator for people to participate in the democratic process. So that's my take. Reagan says he wants to hit back. So Reagan, you're our guest, so we'll give you the last word on this, and then Alex, you should close.
I think the number one thing that is different, and I'll give credit, not by name because I don't know if they want to be named, but a friend I was talking to the other day, right after we had heard, and I called him. I was like, what are your take on this? And he said, I think the number one difference between when Roe v. Wade was decided and a couple, in the couple decades that followed and today is that via Obamacare, birth control is very available and it works pretty well. And that hasn't always been the case in history. And so I think, yes, you're right, Ben, it will energize and give Democratic volunteers and rank and file voters who are really tuned into the issue and give you guys more energy. I totally agree with that. But I do think that for a broad stroke of the electorate, if they can get free birth control or very low cost birth control, and it works most of the time, the need or the idea that they're going to need an abortion is diminished somewhat. And so it maybe doesn't add, I would say it maybe doesn't add as much flavor to the independent or swing vote. And that abortion doesn't creep in as much to the issues there. Still going to be a lot more based on the economy or at the congressional level, foreign policy with Russia, right? And it may not actually enter in. I think it might be where Roe v. Wade and the abortion topic really enters into the bases of both parties and energizes the bases of both parties, but they can't break through to the middle because of that. And I could be wrong, but that was his take, and I thought it was pretty smart.
So I actually agree with a point from each of you, but think both your conclusions are wrong or potentially wrong. So Reagan, I agree, as we've talked about this many times. I think any GOP candidate running for statewide office who talks about how pro-choice they are is basically just bound to lose. I'm personally pro-life, but I think electorally the pro-life position is better regardless. I also agree, as you said, kind of for Republicans, and kind of avoiding, focus on those specific issues, avoid maybe some of the pitfalls.
Before you keep going, is that your belief because you think the base will leave if the base leaves for pro-choice Republicans? Is that your thesis for why it's a worse position?
I think it angers the base and it doesn't really get you any points. I mean, I just remember always Newt, how Newt would talk about how pro-choice he was. And I remember that I wish I would have kept this mailer, where I got this mailer and it was like, Newt and Donald Trump are threatening your right to choice. And I was like, it doesn't matter, Newt. They're going to attack you over it.
I see.
No matter what your position is.
Yes, Planned Parenthood is not going to give Republicans, at least in the near future, I don't foresee them ever endorsing a pro-choice Republican. They're always going to pick the Democrat as long as the Democrat is pro-choice. And so you're right, Alex. You can't win anything on that.
Yeah, so I do agree with Reagan on that. I also, though, do agree with Ben that Democrats have really been looking, I think, for an out this cycle because it's not great right now, right? We got inflation. There's a war in Ukraine. I mean, the price of everything is crazy. Interest rates are going up, all of that sort of stuff. And finally, something has actually happened where Democrats can sort of mobilize their voters and maybe some of those independent voters who don't really care about elections in general, but sort of those specific issues. But I disagree with both of your conclusions. And I'm not saying mine is right, but I'm actually curious to where, obviously this will energize some people, but where does this, because I mean, we just had John Orvik on last week, right? And I think he said abortion was like number 7 or number 8 or number 9 or something.
That was before the leak. And
so exactly. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. That was before the leak. So I won't say that my conclusion is right, but like how much does it actually move up the totem, right? And I also think it just depends, like how well does a Republican handle this issue? Because I think whether it's Kotek or whether it's Reed, they're going to want to talk about abortion a lot, whereas Drazen or Bob or Bud or whoever else wins, they're going to want to talk about crime, homelessness, inflation, etc. So it's sort of how well can the GOP candidate navigate those answers and pivot to the ones they want to talk about compared to being the ones that the Democrats want to talk about. So with that being said, and there's some.
I have to quote the West Wing before we.
I was saying there's some wild things going on in the Zoom chat right now.
But, so there's a West Wing quote that basically said, I think this is Josh Lyman who says, a lot of people think elections are about two competing answers to the same question, but really elections are about determining what the question itself is. So to your point, Alex, Democrats are going to want voters to be deciding on one set of questions and Republicans are going to want voters to be deciding on a separate set of questions. In Oregon, abortion access will be a major question that Democratic candidates will want voters to be asking themselves when they cast a ballot. And I think to your point, in purple and blue seats across the purple, blue, and probably any competitive seats, I can't imagine a Republican being super forward on abortion access.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. But Reagan, thank you so much. 1, for joining the pod, and 2, for preparing that list, because as we said when we came into this, Ben and I had no show outline, and Reagan spent hours preparing the show outline. So that's always nice when the guest does that. But Reagan, thank you for coming on. And before we let you go, if folks want to follow you, they want to read about your analysis, they want to know more about you, maybe send you some hate mail or some angry DMs, where can they do that?
The best place for all of both the friendly and hate mail is Twitter. I'm at Reagan Knopp. You can find in my bio. You can find my newsletter. You can find my website, and you can find my email address. And I would love to hear the comments from everybody and what they think about that, because I think this is a super interesting topic. Not only the primaries and how people will process the primaries, what happens at the general elections, and how Roe v. Wade's going to affect the election. I am a political geek at heart, and so I just enjoy chatting about it and love the opportunity to be on the pod and become your most guested podcast guest.
True.
I think hopefully
true.
with my 3rd episode. So.
Yeah, and still, the powers that be at Oregon 360 are still debating whether or not they want to make you the permanent host and remove Alex. It's an unsettled question, so we'll see.
We could remove Ben, Reagan, and then it would be a real source of truth.
It could be you versus the Rational Republican podcast for dominance in the right wing podcast space in Oregon.
Very good. Well, Reagan, thank you so much for coming on, and everybody, thanks for sticking with us and listening. Please make sure you go subscribe to us on YouTube. We almost have enough YouTube subscribers to get our own custom URL. We're literally right there. So please go and subscribe to us on YouTube. Make sure to hit the subscribe button on the podcast and give us 5 stars if your platform does so allow. And thanks again for listening. We'll see you in the next one.